Coming up on Eternal Companions.
High school graduates that have ADHD on average make 17% less money over their lifetime than their peers who do not have ADHD. Not just their neurotypical peers, but just their peers who don't have ADHD. 17% is a lot of money. Welcome back to the Eternal Companions podcast. We're your hosts, Scott and Sarah.
On this podcast, we share the secret to developing and maintaining a long-lasting and fulfilling relationship.
Okay, Scott, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about kind of a heavy topic for some. For us, we've decided to make it a little bit lighthearted, but this conversation is going to be about neurodivergence and mental health and how that has impacted us as adults and impacted our marriage. So.
Okay, wait. What's neurodivergence?
Thank you for asking my notes. That's number one on my notes. Okay, so this is according to somebody who's way smarter than me. Neurodivergence pretty much is the diversity of the human brain and how it processes information. And so that's a really kind of like a catch-all term for a lot of different maybe cognitive disorders or mental health disorders or diseases even. So it could be talking about autism, dyslexia, ADHD, PTSD, OCD. It really is a catch-all term for people whose brain functions differently than what some scientist and some doctor somewhere has decided is normal or neurotypical. So the reason why we're having this discussion is because you and I are not neurotypical individuals.
Yeah. And I don't know if anyone is.
No, which is interesting because I also did more research and it said that 15 to 20% of American adults are estimated to be neurodivergent. But that's a really great point. It's like, what does that even mean? Like, does it mean they have been diagnosed with one of these things? Or because I don't know anybody whose brain works exactly the way that it's supposed to.
Because there's so many categories. I guess category might not be the right word.
And like spectrums.
Yeah. So many different areas in which you could be neurodivergent here and then typical everywhere else.
Right.
But there's so many of those that everyone's probably, there aren't two people who have the exact same brain.
Thank goodness. That would be awfully boring, right?
Yeah.
So that's have you felt that just in general, this is a really high level question, that understanding that you and others are not neurotypical has affected the way that you perceive relationships? Super high level.
Yeah. Not necessarily just our romantic relationship, but when I was younger, I thought everyone did have the same brain.
I'd love to talk more about that. Like, what was your understanding, not only of like different cognition, but of mental health from when you were young?
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's a loaded question.
So what was my understanding of it? Zero. I had no understanding of mental health and neurodivergence. Part of that is just being a kid and you can develop the theory of mind where you understand people are different people, but that doesn't mean you fully understand that people perceive and comprehend information in different ways. And
that really wasn't talked about like in classrooms or ever. We were raised in the early 2000s. This was not a conversation that anybody was having, let alone children. So.
And it's still, I wouldn't expect a young child to understand that completely. And so I had my brain, obviously, and my way of thinking. And it seemed natural to me that other people would think the way I did.
Yeah. When did you realize that was not the case? Or I guess that was when you were a child. How did that start like developing or staying the same as you became a young man in your late teens?
Into my teenage years. At first, it was kind of frustration that like, why don't people understand this? Especially
like a topic or by this? Understand?
Yeah, any given topic.
Okay.
Most of my interactions with people were at school. And so I felt that I understood every topic. And so did my test scores.
You're a very smart guy.
And so I would get frustrated when people didn't understand why is this so hard to comprehend. But it didn't click that it is okay for it to be hard for someone to comprehend, and that they might have different perceptions and just ways of processing information. And mine just happened to align with memorizing information and repeating patterns the way we're taught to in the American education system.
Right. That's like a really rewarded like way of thinking in America. So that's interesting. Okay. So that's kind of like the way that people think. I'm curious what your perspective was on mental health, like anxiety, depression, things like that growing up, and then even up to when we got married.
Yeah, well, that has a lot to do with what I was taught. And in my household, depression was fake.
Really?
Yeah. Your brain is so strong that you can control all of your emotions and your feelings and your thoughts. That was essentially what was taught. And it took me a long time to realize that some people can't. And I can't in every situation. And that's not to say that you can't practice and become better at grounding yourself.
Coping.
And, coping. And when you are in situations where you start to stray from executive function and decision making into fight or flight, there are ways that you can learn to control and restore that executive function. But that also doesn't mean that straying from executive function or feeling feelings that are overwhelming, that doesn't mean that didn't happen. Just because you are capable of controlling emotions and thoughts to a certain extent. Does that make any sense?
It does. And that's like a really good insight that you have developed over time. And I'd love to chat about like the process of developing that new mindset that you have around mental health, because I remember it was kind of a struggle when we first got married and when we were getting engaged and everything, just having a relationship as adults, for you to understand me and my mental health struggles at first. And sometimes it was, from my perspective, I did feel a little bit unsupported at the beginning. Now, not at all, but of like, you just need to XYZ. Like if you could just be happy, whatever, So I'm really curious as to sort of like how you developed that new mindset, specifically as it pertains to me. I guess a better starting question is like, when did you realize that I was somebody who maybe was neurodivergent or had mental health struggles as an adult?
When did I realize? I think that I knew the whole time.
Great.
However, when the real question for me is, when did I come to understand what that truly meant?
Right.
When did I come to understand that like depression can be real and
not a choice,
uncontrollable to an extent? Exactly. That was probably several months into the marriage, and it was due to us having conversations about it and you essentially telling me I was wrong. But you were in school for psychology.
Right. I was the authority figure on this topic.
And my parents weren't. And that's where all my information came from on the topic beforehand. I didn't do any individual study or research into psychology. And so it came in two parts. Was when you told me I was wrong, and then about the same time, a few months into the relationship, when I started to accept that I was wrong in a lot of categories, not just this one, but
that's what marriage will do to you. A healthy marriage will make you realize like, hey, the mindset that I've had is a one-track mind. And now I've been opened up to somebody else's mind and somebody else's life. and I have this new perspective. That's
Yeah.
what I think happens in a good marriage, in my opinion.
And me being wrong wasn't a bad thing.
No.
It was just a lack of information or
I've been
education
wrong
on
in so
specific
many
topics.
ways. Yeah.
Yeah. So don't worry if you're wrong.
That's a good thing because it means that you get to learn something.
Exactly.
So that's awesome that you did come to understand, like, hey, this isn't a choice. My perspective on this maybe was not 100% correct. And now I can move forward.
Can I add a bit to that?
Yeah.
So that shifted the way I interacted with you in those situations.
100%.
Previously, it was, why don't you just stop? Just stop being sad.
Yeah. Or
No.
overstimulated. That
Stop.
was a huge one.
Just stop. And then it turned from me telling you, hey, just stop, into how can I help?
Mm-hmm.
Which is obviously the better choice.
Right.
In a marriage. No matter what you believe, if your partner is visibly or verbally going through something difficult, you shouldn't say, well, stop going through something difficult. You should support and offer help.
Totally. I really appreciate that you have developed in that way. It has made my life significantly better. And so I really do appreciate that. I'd love to ask you, so that's kind of when you realized things were going on with me. When did you realize that you yourself were having maybe mental health struggles or like a difference in cognition from me or from other people? And how did that make you feel to realize that you were what you were raised to believe was like fake? You know what I mean?
Good question. So I'll answer your last question first.
Okay.
How did it make me feel? I didn't care at that point because my understanding of mental health had developed so much. And then to your first question, because it was so recent that I discovered this. Well, mental health struggles, definitely we started to surmise that those existed while I was still in college.
It was very situational.
Very situational, and typically in the winter.
You do have seasonal affective disorder.
I think so. Don't have a diagnosis, but I think so. Winters are tough for me. I like the sun and long days.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started noticing that and just anxiety around testing, but that's to be expected in college in America.
It is, which is sad.
Sad.
But okay, so that's kind of mental health. What about specifically neurodivergence? And just start telling me your story.
Probably a year ago. I don't know when.
Maybe.
We started
I think
having
I was
discussions.
pregnant.
So probably about a year ago, we really just started thinking that I might have ADHD. Mm-hmm. And we started noticing patterns. Like, there's a lot of them.
There are so many. I noticed that, like, I was able to see it more than you were able to see it because that's just how you've always been. That's your behavior. That's your, like, way of thinking. But for me, I realized, like, Scott is very different. And I thought in my mind at first, like, I'm the problem. To be clear, nobody is the problem in this situation. But I thought, like, I am depressed or I am low energy and Scott is normal. That's kind of what my mindset had been. But then I started looking at your behaviors and I was like, what's going on? And a few of those behaviors are like almost a manic level of hyperfocus. Mm-hmm. On certain tasks, whether it be work, whether it be a specific video game you're playing at that time, whether it be cleaning. That's a huge one. It's like if you start a task, you will complete that task before you go to the bathroom, before you eat, before you're able to engage in a devoted conversation with me. Like you were extremely hyper-focused. And then beyond that, in that hyper-focus, let's talk about cleaning because that's a really good example. You would start cleaning the living room and then you find a sock. Okay, now we're going to the bedroom to put the sock away. Now I notice that the bed needs to be made. Now I have to do this, that. And
I would keep track of all these things. If I was in the living room, I would say in my head, well, I know I'm going to do the laundry soon. And so I'm going to pick up things that go into the bedroom because that's where our laundry basket is. I'm going to put those in my pocket. I think we had a dog visitor
Every
in frame.
episode.
So I'd say, oh, there's some shoes out here and socks. I'm going to put those here so I can grab those on my way to the bedroom. So then I can put them away as I grab the laundry and come back out. And then I'm going to clean this and I'm going to do this and that.
It's
and
like
it was
bing,
like
bing, 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 bing. Like it's
ping
crazy. I asked you when I was pregnant, I asked you to grab me a glass of water. And before I received the glass of water, Scott was outside redoing our misting system on a ladder in the backyard. I like look over and he's like up on a ladder because as you went to get a cup, you saw all these things that reminded you of other things and it just added on tasks.
I was getting you the water.
But
in my brain.
But what I saw is now you're in the backyard up on a ladder and I'm like, that's not where the water is. So that's
getting
like,
the water was step 5.
Yeah. So those are a few examples of why we thought you might have ADHD. And so then recently you decided to talk to somebody about that.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you decide to actually go see a psychiatrist about this?
I thought, imagine the possibilities.
if you could focus on one task.
If my ADHD was a bit more controlled, and I could focus, but also divert attention when necessary. Imagine the possibilities. I was going to take over the world.
Have you?
Yeah.
Awesome. So tell me about that experience of getting help. What was meeting with your psychiatrist like, and what treatment are you experiencing now?
It was a video call, and I talked about the behaviors I had been noticing, and they said, okay, let's try Adderall. And I tried it, and it was, for me, which is apparently atypical, I did not notice a change at first.
Right.
And apparently when you first start taking it, you might have like some super high days, and then it kind of levels out. I was like, this isn't doing anything for me until my prescription ran out and we hadn't got the refill for 2 days, something like that. Mm-hmm. And those days I reverted and my brain could not focus and I was angry.
Oh my gosh, that was the craziest thing. Like it's insane to me to see the difference with you. Like there are so many times when, first of all, I have to remind you to take your medication probably 5 out of 7 times a week, I would say. Do you agree with that or no?
Yeah.
And I think that's funny. It's just a little ironic that I'm like, you need to remember to take your ADHD
it might not be
medication.
Irony. It might be, that's like totally expected.
It just is funny to me.
It is hilarious.
But so sometimes I see Scott, I see you behaving a crazy way in the morning, and like you'll start writing an email to somebody and like you'll start making jokes in the email and just kind of going off the rails a little bit. You'll like perform a dance routine. You will sometimes be really agitated, like quick to anger. And I'm like, did you take your medication this morning? And you're like, no. And then you do. And then you're like, you're back to being focused, like you're calm. You can handle bad situations, which we find ourselves in very regularly with our small child. Like you have more patience. So as your roommate, I have noticed an improvement in some of the behaviors that maybe are seen as not so desirable. You're always desirable to me, but but you know what I mean? Like I really have seen an improvement. Has it made you feel more calm and peaceful at all? Or do you just feel like you get more done? Like, I don't know. How do you feel emotionally about this whole thing?
I do feel like I get more done, because another thing we didn't mention was past 2 p.m. I couldn't do anything.
Oh my gosh. That was so frustrating to me because I'm a night owl and you're a morning person.
Yeah.
That was hard for us.
But now I'm much more capable of executing tasks in the afternoon and evening.
You can go to the post office at 3 p.m. It will be okay.
I just used to, I couldn't do it.
You're such a morning
person. The day was over. So that alone has allowed me just more time to get things done. I think I'm more peaceful. It's really hard to say. I'd have to go a day without taking it.
Please no. You have before, and
Yeah.
we're like, we got to make sure we take it
And
tomorrow.
so
That's always what
I
we find
trust
out.
it's still working because I'm feeling the same
Yeah.
and not noticing anything in particular that's out of the ordinary.
I have noticed when we've discussed this new diagnosis with family members, there have been
There's pushback.
There's pushback. And I would like to talk to you about that because I did some more research on like the prevalence of ADHD and like how common it really is, because I feel like mental health and different like cognition disorders should not be stigmatized. We all have something going on.
Yeah.
So this is a direct report for our family and friends. Our friends are pretty supportive, but
Do we have to cite sources on this format?
I can put it in the show notes. I can put links to what I've found. But I've done some interesting things. So Forbes Health had a lot of really good information on ADHD, and as of last year, 366 million adults worldwide were diagnosed with ADHD.
And what's the population of America?
I don't know.
So I think it's
I'll
around
Google it.
300 million.
What is the population?
So, and you said diagnosed?
331 million. Yes, diagnosed with ADHD.
And so,
366 million.
some of those people are in America.
Yes.
Out of that figure. But like, that's a lot of people.
That is so many people. And another thing that I found was really interesting that makes me feel like people should get help if they need it is that high school graduates that have ADHD on average make 17% less money over their lifetime than their peers who do not have ADHD. Not just their neurotypical peers, but just their peers who don't have ADHD. 17% is a lot of money.
I'm really interested in how they tracked that.
I know.
17% over their lifetime?
Yeah. It's been a long study.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
That was also from Forbes Health. Thank you, Forbes Health.
Yeah.
And the last thing that I wanted to mention about ADHD is that it is so difficult for adults to get diagnosed with ADHD. It's very interesting that you did. And I feel like I'm going to toot my own horn here. The reason why you were able to recognize this and get this diagnosis is because I was aware of what ADHD symptoms looked like. And then I suggested, like, if you're open to it, you should go talk to somebody. Usually people are diagnosed with ADHD when they're school-aged children because teachers and pediatricians are really on it about diagnosing ADHD because it's really prevalent. But adults have such a hard time getting diagnosed because they usually aren't around people that like recognize ADHD so well, like teachers and pediatricians.
Yeah.
So I think that if you think, this is to the viewers, if you think that you have some of these symptoms and you were not diagnosed in childhood, you can explore that as an adult. Like, don't feel bad about that.
Do research.
Yeah.
Because you kind of have to self-diagnose.
At first.
And then report on what your findings are to a professional.
Right. And it's even more difficult if you're not married or you don't have somebody that you live with, because you might think like, this is just how I am. This is how my household runs. And you may not realize that you could be living in a more efficient way.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very interesting that you got diagnosed as an adult and that there has been pushback. Do you have any more comments on the pushback? Like, I just wanted to tell our associates that like, this is so common. And in my opinion, medication is not something to be ashamed of. That's why we are legitimately putting this out there for the world to hear.
Right.
What do you feel about that?
Yeah. The pushback on getting a diagnosis or taking medication is self-limiting. And that's fine if you want to do that.
Yeah. Not us.
Feel free to limit yourself to being less productive and feeling worse.
Mm-hmm.
And modern medication and modern medicine in general is a good thing.
It's beautiful.
And that's why people used to die on average in their 30s. And we don't anymore.
I don't want to die when I'm 30.
And obviously that was like, there's a bunch of people who lived a normal amount and then a ton of people who died like super young.
When they were like 1 day
And,
old.
we took an average,
Yeah.
and statistics are weird how they work like that.
Did you
But
take your medication today?
I did.
Just kidding.
Modern medicine has allowed people to live longer,
Yeah.
healthier lives,
Yeah.
especially considering how horrible our diets are.
Oh
and
my
we
gosh.
still live longer.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's awesome. We
Thank
can
you.
slam Oreos and
And we're fine.
we're fine. I love that. Thank you so much for being open and sharing your experience with mental health, ADHD.
Is there any general advice for approaching neurodivergence in a relationship?
Yes. Step 1 is acceptance, in my opinion. Accept that you or your partner is having something going on,
Okay.
you know, and
Yeah.
then that's just step 1 in any conflict.
It is. Yeah.
You know, acceptance. Accept that something is going on. Try to learn about what's going on with your partner.
Do some research.
Yeah, from like professionals.
Yeah. And also ask them about it.
Yes. Take that research to them and say, hey, I did some research about ADHD. Have you been experiencing this? Like, is there a way that I can support you through this?
Mm-hmm.
I've learned even helping them by looking up what solutions are. I watched this video and I found out that this person who has ADHD says this is really helpful. Do you think that would be helpful to you?
So approach in a supportive, helpful way. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A great idea.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Don't stigmatize it to them. Like, don't make them feel weird. Don't make them feel like they're doing something wrong or that their mind is broken.
Yeah.
That would be a huge piece of advice that I have. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think lastly, probably don't stigmatize it to them, but also don't talk to others about it in a negative way.
Right.
Don't like it could be a personal thing that they don't want to share, or at the very least, you can share it openly, but don't be negative.
That's our advice, I would say. That's all that we have about neurodivergence today. Leave us a comment if you have any questions about anything specifically, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for listening to this episode.
Do you have a love story worth sharing? Head to eternalcompanionspodcast.com to be a guest on our show.
And don't forget to check out the show notes.
See you next week.